Chapter 605. The meeting went on smoothly. After that, Luan Shaochen sent a messenger to the Phnom Penh dynasty to demand an explanation. The speed of the response fully reflected the high efficiency of the government. For this reason, Yang Bao also specially added an explanation, and this news also made many people rejoice. From this matter, they also saw that they had a powerful backer behind them. If they could win this war or force the Phnom Penh dynasty to bow their heads, no matter where they went in the future, they would be able to hold their heads high and not be afraid of being targeted. The messenger was very fast. He left the city at noon and rushed all the way. After 7 days, he arrived in Phnom Penh city. He took out a document and said that he wanted to see the king of the Phnom Penh dynasty. The officials of the Ministry of Rites were responsible for receiving the messenger from Laos. When they learned the purpose of the messenger, these officials were shocked. They were shocked that a caravan was killed. How could the Laos government be so agitated? Could it be that one of the people who was killed was a high-ranking official in the provincial government? Faced with the firm attitude of the messenger, the receptionist did not dare to be careless. He quickly reported the matter. In the end, the document asking for compensation and an apology was sent to King Boromir's desk. When Boromir saw this document, he felt a sense of confusion. But then he was furious. He immediately ordered someone to find General Hun Senator. He wanted to ask if the matter was true. If it was true, General Hun Sen was too bold. Due to the mercenary army's strength and combat power, it took half a year to conquer Jiaoji and Lansong respectively, forcing the surrounding countries to take the initiative to form an alliance. For example, the Phnom Penh dynasty was now an ally of Siam and the Awol dynasty. Although they were allies, it did not mean that they were willing to compete with the mercenary army. At least, none of the three countries were willing to take the initiative to provoke the mercenary army and become their first target. Perhaps in the final battle, the three countries would win, but the first country to be defeated would definitely be the most miserable. Even if they won, they would not get any benefits. Therefore, the three countries put their hopes on other countries. They hoped that other countries would fight with the mercenary army to the death first, so that they could reap the benefits. However, this definitely didn't mean that his country would be the first country to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Hun Sen was urgently called to the palace. As soon as he saw Hun Sen, he was scolded by the king. Hun Sen didn't know what he had done recently to incur the king's anger. When Boguama was tired of scolding, he threw the document at Hun Sen's feet. He looked at Hun Sen with an expression that said, "Look at what you've done." Hun Sen picked up the document with trepidation. When he saw what was written on it, he immediately regained his confidence. He was greedy for money and had done many things that crossed the line, but the Salangan family's caravan was definitely not under his command. So at this moment he strongly refuted and even cursed to prove his innocence. Hun Sen raised his head and looked as though he had been greatly wronged. When Boromir saw this, he started to doubt the authenticity of this matter. After all, there was no reason for Hun Sen to lie in front of him. If he did, he would find a way to make up for it. "You really didn't do this?" Although Boromir was 70% convinced, he couldn't help but ask with certainty. "Absolutely not. If I did, I'm willing to be burned to ashes after my death," Hun Sen said fiercely. Of course, he was full of confidence. Ever since the Salangans sent people over, he had deliberately called a few of his confidants over. In the end, he confirmed that these people didn't do anything. Everything was a misunderstanding. Now that someone was using this matter as an excuse, of course he wasn't afraid. If you didn't do it, why did the Salangans insist that you did it? They even sent a document from Laos because of this. Could it be that they are deliberately putting the blame on us so that they can use the army against us? Boromir's eyes kept darting around as he considered all kinds of possibilities. That must be it. They want to use the army against us. Your Majesty, the mercenaries are very ambitious. This is the reason they are looking for. We have to be careful. Hun Sen immediately agreed after hearing what Boromir said. So that's the case. How can they bully us like this? Why are they looking for us? What should we do? Why don't General Hun? Boromir was halfway through his sentence when he shook his head. Now that he had formed an alliance with Siam and the Awad dynasty, If he showed any intention of backing out, it would mean that he had voluntarily withdrawn from the alliance. If that happened, if the mercenaries really chose him as their next target, without an ally, how could he resist them? It seemed that it was impossible to back down. However, if he insisted on being stubborn, he didn't want to be attacked by the mercenaries. He couldn't make a decision at the moment. He looked at Hun Sen, who was still waiting for his orders, and waved his hand. "You can leave now. By the way, when people ask you about this matter, don't say anything. Don't admit or deny it. Let's see how it goes." "Oh," Hun Sen responded intentionally. It seemed that this matter had something to do with him. However, since the king had such an attitude, what else could he do other than agree? Before Boromir could come up with a solution, he kept delaying the matter. When the messenger from Laos failed to meet him 3 times, he left angrily. Before he left, he even said in a domineering tone that if he still couldn't get a satisfactory answer when he returned to Laos, he would send an army instead of an emissary to Laos. The messenger left. Based on what he said before he left, there wasn't much time left for the Phnom Penh dynasty. There were only 7 days left. If they couldn't make a decision, it seemed like a war was imminent. When he heard that a war was about to break out, Boromir was really afraid. The military strength of the Phnom Penh dynasty was only average. In terms of territory, it was smaller than Laos. Once a fight broke out, what would he use to defend against the mercenary army? He couldn't win the war. If he couldn't win, he would have to bow down. If he bowed down, the mercenaries would have no reason to send an army. Although it would be humiliating and might even cause dissatisfaction with his allies, what other choice did he have? Just when Boromir was hesitating, and he was even inclined to admit defeat, the messengers from Siam and the Awol dynasties suddenly appeared. They all expressed their approval of the Phnom Penh dynasty's initiative to attack Laos. At the same time, they also stated that if Laos wanted to harm the Phnom Penh dynasty, they wouldn't sit idly by. They would take the initiative to send troops to help. After all, they were allies. With the support of his allies, Boromir's confidence increased a little. However, he still couldn't make a decision. But it was at this moment that something unexpected happened. He didn't know how, but this matter was spread all over the country. Immediately, a large number of citizens stood up and expressed that they would not lower their heads for the sake of the country's dignity. At this critical moment, they were willing to fight for the country. Following the pleas of the people, more and more nobles and rich gentry stood up. They expressed that they would not bow down to the unreasonable accusations of Lao province. For this reason, they were willing to pay a large amount of military expenditure to support the king. The people's matter was easy to deal with. As long as the public opinion was good, the kind and ignorant people could be easily manipulated and led. But why did the nobles stand up as well? Boromir was very puzzled. He immediately sent someone to investigate. Soon, the results reached his ears. It turned out that the nobles did this for the sake of their own interests. They said that it was for the sake of their interests because the envoys of Siam and Ava contacted them in private. They said that as long as Laos was defeated and occupied, the nobles would get a lot of benefits. They had no choice because there were too many precedents. Whether it was in Vietnam or Laos, many of the nobles' fields had been divided and their houses occupied. Once the mercenaries occupied Phnom Penh dynasty, the nobles would be forced to a dead end. This was indeed the case. In the spirit of giving land to the rich was the fastest way to get closer to the people and gain their support. This was done in both Vietnam and Laos. Many rich gentry went bankrupt because of this, and some of them even had their properties confiscated because of this, and their entire family was taken away to reform through labor. However, not all nobles were targeted like this. For example, some nobles who were doing legitimate business or inherited their titles and relied on their salaries. Because they didn't have a lot of land and didn't do anything evil, they still maintained their strength intact. But no one knew that if these people were not targeted now, they would not be targeted in the future. What if the mercenaries were to gain a foothold? Would they do something to them? No one could say for sure. This scared the nobles of Phnom Penh dynasty. In addition, some people instigated them, so they all stood up. Instead of being at the mercy of others, they might as well fight. What if they defeated the mercenaries? Then, not only would they be fine, but there would also be a lot of benefits to be gained. It was clear that everyone knew what they should do in this situation. As a result, these people jumped out and decided to take a gamble. If it was only the support of the people, Boromir was not worried. He was the ruler here. As long as he gave the order, with the help of the army, it would be easy to suppress some people. However, with the participation of these nobles, it was completely different. These people's forces were complicated. If things went wrong, even his throne would be in danger. These people were not to be offended. In other words, his rise to the throne was inseparable from the support of these people. Chapter 606. With the support of the people, the support of the allies of the two countries, and the pressure of the nobles, Boromir had no other choice. He made up his mind to not lower his head and began to mobilize the army. While asking for military funds from the nobles, he also began to recruit soldiers from the people. There was no such thing as an airtight secret, not to mention that the Golden Bien dynasty had no intention of hiding their actions. Just as the emissary returned to Wanxiang City, new news came. The Golden Bien dynasty had begun to prepare for war and had recruited 100,000 soldiers from the people. In addition to his original army, the number of soldiers reached 400,000. When the number of enemies was reported to Luan Shaochen, he was shocked. His first reaction was to ask his subordinate, the sixth young master, where was he? When he found out that the sixth young master had returned to Wanxiang City and was in the original Lansong Palace, Luan Shaochen put down everything in his hands and rushed to the palace. Now that things had gotten out of hand, he could not hold it in anymore. He urgently needed the support of the sixth young master. Yang Chendong returned to Wanxiang City the night before yesterday. As the saying goes, leaving the city without a sound, returning without a sound. He returned after arranging everything. After being busy for a while, he came back and had a good sleep. When he woke up, Yang Chendong began to stroll around the palace. As he walked around, he clicked his tongue and sighed, "These bastards really know how to enjoy life." The country isn't very big, and there are still many people who can't afford to eat. Their palaces are bigger and more luxurious than the other. How many people's hard-earned money is this? Young master, the palace in Crimson City is better than here. Hearing Yang Chendong's sigh, Tiger's Mane thought that the sixth young master was mentally unbalanced and wanted to comfort him. I know. Yang Chendong nodded, then looked at Tiger's Mane as if he was looking at an idiot. This immediately attracted Beta Persei's laughter from the other side. Knowing that he was being laughed at by Beta Persei and seen as an idiot by the sixth young master, Tiger's Mane was a little unconvinced. He wanted to explain, but Yang Chendong spoke first. The young master thought that it would be a waste to have such a big palace here. Why don't we make good use of it? Why is there no one living here? The young master can live here. In the future, he will have a palace in every province he goes to. How great would that be? Tiger's Mane seemed to be dissatisfied with the contempt and took the initiative to speak. What? In your eyes, the young master is a person who likes to be extravagant and wasteful? After rolling his eyes again, Yang Chendong did not give Tiger's Mane a chance to speak. Instead, he said as if he had made some kind of decision, "I think we can move the business street to the palace. This way, not only will the business area be bigger, but doing business in the palace will also attract more curious people. That way, we can earn more money, right?" If they really did business in the palace, they could really attract more merchants. Think about it, because of the difference in levels, although merchants were rich, their social status was not high. Most of them did not have the opportunity to enter the palace. If there really was such an opportunity, there would definitely be merchants who had not established business relations with the Yang family who would want to take a look. As long as they came with the variety of products and novelty of the Yang family's business, there was no need to worry that those people would not take out money to buy the goods. Wouldn't that increase the speed of earning money? In terms of earning money, the trading company of the outer skies was not inferior to the fighting strength of the mercenaries. Especially the novelty of the products and the variety of products. No matter where they were, these products would be crazily fought over. However, Yang Chendong was still not satisfied. There were too many things that needed to be spent on the Xianxia. For example, high salaries. Currently, the officials of Vietnam and Laos were receiving high salaries, which were even higher than the tax revenue of these two provinces. If they wanted to reach the same level, they would need to develop for a period of time. And if they wanted to achieve the goal of earning money, they would have to wait for a few more years. In addition, the basic construction of the two provinces, such as building roads and houses, used reinforced concrete, which was the toughest and most useful material. The investment required was astronomical. This was Yang Chendong. If it was someone else, they would only be able to dream about it and would not be able to use it in reality. Although the development of Crimson City was going well and it already had a strong ability to earn money, every time a ship was shipped, it was equivalent to countless gold and silver being thrown into one's pocket. However, just relying on the ability to produce blood here was not good for long-term development. Moreover, the military factories, power plants, shipyards, and so on were also extremely costly. Sometimes, in order to succeed in a research project, one would have to fork out an unimaginable amount of money. Yang Chendong did not want to place all the pressure on Crimson City. He wanted the businesses in Vietnam and Laos to become more developed and larger. Only then would they be able to produce enough hematopoietic products and sell their own products. However, the scale of the business street was still too small. The number of merchants it could receive was limited, and the amount of goods it could store was also limited. Therefore, he set his sights on the uninhabited palace. Governor Luan is here. Beta Persei's sharp eyes had already seen Luan Xiaochen approaching from afar and reminded him in a low voice. Little Governor Luan is here. Yang Chendong returned to reality from his contemplation and turned around to laugh. The title of Little Governor Luan was first called by Yang Chendong, so Tiger's Mane and the others often called him that in private. Because of habit, sometimes when they met in person, they would still call him that. This caused Luan Xiaochen to be dissatisfied, but he could not say anything. After all, this was Yang Chendong's love for him. Adding the word little in front of the governor's name, would it really not affect his prestige? The sixth young master. Although he was displeased with the word little in his heart, he did not dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction in front of Yang Chendong. He even knew in his heart that adding the word little meant that Yang Chendong treated him as one of his own. If you don't believe me, go and look at the others. Who else had the word little in front of their official title? He should be happy that he was the only one who received this honor. Come, you came at the right time. Yang Chendong stretched out his hand and pulled Luan Xiaochen's arm, then pointed to the palace in front of him and said, "What do you think about making this place into a place where business is concentrated?" Luan Xiaochen was also shocked by Yang Chendong's words. He instinctively wanted to say the same thing as Tiger's Mane. This was the place where the sixth young master came to rest. It was equivalent to the emperor's side palace. Was he really willing to use it for business? Yes, it's here. Yang Chendong did not care what Luan Xiaochen thought. Instead, he said to himself, usually no one lives here. Instead, we have to arrange for people to guard and clean here. It's simply too wasteful. If he could take it out and make good use of it, wouldn't he be able to use it to attract more merchants to come here? Don't you think this is a good idea? Of course, it's a good idea. Luan Xiaochen said with certainty in his heart. As the situation in Laos became more and more stable, more and more businessmen came to get goods. He was worried that the original business street was a little too small. But if he wanted to expand, he would need to invest a lot of money, which made him a little distressed. If the palace could be used, not only would it solve the problem of investment, it could also expand the commercial street, store more goods, satisfy the needs of more people, earn more money, and get more business tax. No matter how one looked at it, it was a good thing. Although he thought so in his heart, Luan Xiaochen still asked a question. If this place is changed into a business district, where will the sixth young master live here in the future? Just leave a side palace. The area of this palace is too large. I can't live alone. Yang Chendong answered casually. Obviously, he had just thought about this problem and made a decision. That's also possible. Luan Xiaochen nodded. He could only say that it was possible. He could not say that it would definitely work or not. This was where he was smart. The palace was equivalent to Yang Chendong's private property. He could decide how to deal with it. Other people did not have such power, even if he might be Yang Chendong's brother-in-law in the future. Otherwise, if other people knew that he was the one who wanted to use the palace, and then the sixth young master agreed, who knew if it would cause some bootlickers to be unhappy? It was even possible to cause a group of people to attack him because of this. As the territory controlled by Yang Chendong grew larger and larger, and as the strength of the mercenaries continued to expand, no one thought that the sixth young master would be limited to being a loyal duke. Not to mention a duke, it was very normal for him to be called a king and an emperor in the future. Anything related to the sixth young master was not a trivial matter, and there would be more and more rules in the future. Now that he wanted to use his private property, it was inevitable that he would be punished in the future. Luan Shaochen was very careful, and it could even be said that he had a long-term vision. In the eyes of Yang Chendong, he just laughed. He liked subordinates who did things with a sense of propriety. Such people could be entrusted with important tasks and have greater prospects in the future. Well, since you don't object, it's settled. In the future, not only the royal palace here, but also the royal palace in Yunnan province, as long as the other occupied royal palaces can be classified as commercial use. In this way, we can save some time and financial resources to build a commercial street. Yang Chendong was happy with his idea. At the same time, the words, "you don't object," also removed Luan Shaochen from this matter. If you don't object, it was enough to show that this matter was led by Yang Chendong alone, and it had nothing to do with other people. If there were any problems in the future, naturally, they would not be able to find other people. Yang Chendong's words revealed another piece of information, and that was that he would occupy other palaces in the future. This also shocked Luan Shaochen, and he took the opportunity to tell the person in charge of Yang Chendong. The sixth young master, there are some problems now, and it started with a business family called Salangan. Chapter 607. Luan Shaochen didn't know that Yang Chendong had already known about the development of this matter from the beginning to the end, and it was even planned by Yang Chendong. He was just fulfilling his duty as a governor and reported the matter truthfully. Yang Chendong did not intend to interrupt Luan Shaochen. Instead, he listened to the report very carefully. From time to time, he would frown and nod. After a while, when Luan Shaochen finally finished, especially when Luan Shaochen mentioned that the Golden Bian dynasty had begun to gather troops and recruit new troops, Yang Chendong could not help but say, "They are just courting death." He did have such qualifications to say such things. In the eyes of others, the Golden Border dynasty was a great existence. Even in the eyes of the Great Ming dynasty, because it was too far away, it was quite out of reach. However, in Yang Chendong's view, it was completely different. The Golden Border dynasty bordered Vietnam, Laos, and Siam respectively. Just like the filling of a bun, it was tightly surrounded by the dough. If it was really aimed at him, Yang Chendong could start from several places. How could he put such a Golden Border dynasty in his eyes? Luan Shaochen was also excited by Yang Chendong's words. Yes, the Golden Border dynasty's move is no different from looking for death, but the problem is that now the three small countries of Phnom Penh, Siam, and Ava have formed an alliance. No matter which of them is attacked, the other two countries will immediately follow. Although the mercenary is strong, it is still difficult to fight against three. You're right. But let me ask you, is the Sorangan family a citizen of Laos? Yang Chendong asked. Of course. In this regard, Luan Shaochen gave the answer without hesitation. Well, if they are citizens of Laos, then they are bullied. As the masters, how can we just sit back and do nothing? This will not only lose the hearts of the people, but it will also make others think that we are easy to bully. This must never happen. So if anyone provokes us, there is only one word: beat them. Beat them until they feel pain, beat them until they are afraid, beat them until they are obedient in the future. If we don't even have this bit of courage, then what's the difference between us and other small countries? Remember, the strength of a country doesn't depend on how much territory you have or how much resources you have. It depends on whether your citizens have their own status and whether they can gain the respect of others. Do you understand? This was equivalent to Yang Chendong giving Wan Xiaochen a lesson. The latter listened attentively and in the end, his eyes lit up. Sixth young master, I understand. Well, if you understand, then do what you should do. Let me, the young master, finish the war in the Golden Bian dynasty. Yang Chendong said confidently. To others, this war was a little sudden, but to him, he had been preparing for it for 4 months, and everything that needed to be arranged had been arranged. Wan Xiaochen left with a happy face. Since the sixth young master said that he would be in charge of the war, he only needed to do the logistics work well. Of course, the economic development of Laos could not be stopped. On the contrary, the huge Lansong palace could be used, and he could use more goods to launch a larger economic trade. After Wan Xiaochen returned to the provincial government, he did not mention anything about the war. Instead, he announced the decision to move the commercial street to the palace and increase the economic trade development. As soon as the news came out, everyone who heard it was shocked and confused. What happened? Could it be that the mercenaries were afraid of the Golden Bian dynasty? Then they wanted to use the increased economic trade share to attract everyone's attention. It made sense. Although the mercenaries had the most advanced firearms, their foundation was too weak. Plus, they had just conquered Vietnam and Laos, so they should be weak. Even in the face of the Golden Bian dynasty's provocation, they had to suppress it first. When the patriarch of Solingen heard the news, he immediately panicked. What did this mean? Did Governor Luan shrink back? He had created enough public opinion, and now many business families were waiting to see the result. If things were to end like this, it would be very awkward for the party involved. Not only would the family's business reach be unable to reach the Golden Bian dynasty, but the other countries would also vigorously attack them. After all, this matter seemed to be caused by them first. It was just a business family. If they suffered a loss in a foreign country, they could just admit it, and then use more money and more sincerity to build relationships. But they still wanted to kidnap the mercenaries and the Laos government, and use administrative pressure to solve everything. If they succeeded, others would look up to them, and it would be normal for them to give the green light. But now the Laos government did not care about them. Without their backing, the Solingen family would naturally be hated by everyone. Nong Si's face was full of panic. This was not only because he could no longer be the patriarch, but also because the entire Solingen family was about to collapse under the heavy pressure. If that really happened, he would become the sinner of the family and be engraved on the list of shame forever. Nong Si could not sit still and wait for death. He got on the carriage and went straight to the Long residence. He wanted to ask Long Xian about it. In fact, with his status, he could not get in touch with any of the higher-ups in Laos. The only person he could get in touch with was his family's business partner. Long Qi was also shocked by the sudden news from the provincial government. Previously, Luan Xiaochen had solemnly vowed that as long as they exposed the matter and made it known to everyone, the provincial government would not sit by and do nothing. But now, the wind had suddenly changed. What was going on? What happened in the middle of it all? By the time Nong Si arrived at the Long residence, Long Qi had already sent someone to the He residence. He wanted to see if he could meet with General He Guang. If he could see General He Guang, it meant that things were not too bad. Otherwise, things would be troublesome. Recently, he had been using the provincial government's name to contact the nobles in Laos, and he had seen some results. But if he were to be abandoned this time, then all his previous efforts would be for naught. Long Qi himself would also become the object of everyone's disdain. He was afraid that in the future, other than staying obediently in the mansion, he would not be able to do anything else, and no one would be willing to believe in him. Don't worry, don't worry. Long Qi saw Nong Si in front of him, sweating profusely. He comforted him, and at the same time, he was comforting himself. I think Governor Luan is a responsible person. He won't abandon us like this. But he's still too young. Young people are always impulsive. Nong Si said in disbelief. I've already sent someone to see General He Guang. Let's see if he's willing to see us first. Long Qi was also affected by this sentence, But at this moment he could only hold on to a glimmer of hope and hope that good news would come. After what seemed like 2 hours, it felt like a year had passed. Finally, the person he sent out came back with a message from He Guang. Don't panic. Everything is under control. Just wait and see the results. This was the message from He Guang. Although Long Qi could not understand it, when he learned that the person he sent not only entered the He residence, but also met with General He Guang, he felt relieved. Since He Guang was willing to see his people, it meant that things were not that bad, and there was still hope. No matter how Long Qi comforted himself, many people had already begun to laugh at him. Suddenly the pressure increased. Whether it was Long Qi or the Solingen family, they were now in a deep crisis. The envoys who had been keeping an eye on the Lao government, especially the governor, Luan Xiaochen, were secretly celebrating. In view of Luan Xiaochen's strong statement, they were all ready to fight with the mercenaries. But who would have thought that it was all bark and no bite? It seemed that things were not going to end well. This inevitably made some people sigh that the mercenaries were just SOSO. After 5 days, the influence became worse and worse. The nobles who stayed in Lao province also began to increase their communication. From time to time, they would spread rumors that they were not optimistic about the future of Lao province. These nobles no longer had any power, but over the years, they had spread their influence and influence deep into various industries. These nobles were not very good at accomplishing things, but they were very good at causing trouble. Under their influence, the volume of goods sold in the commercial street was greatly affected. The problem that the merchants had to consider now was the safety of the goods that had entered the Yang family's hands after leaving Laos. Although no one could deny that the Yang family's products were unique and of high quality, and they didn't have to worry about not being able to sell their products, what if they were robbed like the Suolangan family? The matter with the Sorangan family was too big. If it was not properly solved, the safety of all the merchants would not be guaranteed. The Phnom Penh dynasty was fine after they robbed the silver. Would the other small countries and regions follow suit? For the first time, there was a backlog of goods. The official in charge of this matter went to see Luan Xiaochen and suggested whether Chichen City could suspend the shipment or reduce the amount of goods. Otherwise, there would be problems if there were too many goods, especially when some of the goods still had a shelf life. If they were not sold in time, it would be a big loss. Luan Xiaochen did not seem to hear the suggestion of the official. Not only that, he also sent people to Chichen City in the name of the governor to rush the goods. This was the confidence that Yang Chendong gave him. In the face of Luan Xiaochen's actions, many officials expressed their puzzlement. Some of the more straightforward people began to write to Chichen City, asking whether Luan Xiaochen was capable of being the governor of Lao province. Chapter 608. The situation in Lao province began to change. The criticism of Governor Luan Xiaochen was getting louder by the day. Yang Chendong, who recommended Luan Xiaochen, did not say anything at this time, which made many officials puzzled. They even went to the palace in groups of 3 to 5 to meet the 6th young master and express their opinions. But no one was approved. In fact, Yang Chendong was no longer in Wanxiang City, let alone Lao province. How could he meet his subordinates? No one knew that the 6th young master had appeared in front of Shangding City, which was beside the Mekong River. Since things started here, let's start our attack from here. Yang Chendong sighed and looked at Shangding City, which was 5 miles away. He raised his arm gently and then put it down. Beside him, countless Lung Feng and auxiliary soldiers rushed toward Shangding City. Everything happened without warning. At noon, many soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty were still basking in the sun on the tower. Suddenly, they saw the army green approaching from afar. Their brains short-circuited at the first moment, and then came up with an impossible idea. Enemy attack. No one knew who shouted first. Then, chaos broke out on the city gate tower. The soldiers began to look for bows and arrows and other long-range weapons. Shangding City, which had been peaceful for many years, was suddenly facing a ferocious beast. It was completely unprepared. Before the Lung Feng arrived, it was already in chaos. Close the city gate and send someone to Jujing City to ask for help. The centurion guarding the city shouted loudly. When he realized that no one listened to him, he simply went downstairs, found a fast horse, and rushed out of the city gate on the other side. The centurion's idea was simple. 300 miles behind him, there was a 100,000 army led by General Hun Sen in Jujing City. As long as he sent the message there, it would be a great achievement. It was still the same old saying. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. Just as the centurion rode out of the city and felt the wind whistling past his ears, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest and fell to the ground with a plop. Due to the inertia, the centurion was sent flying. When he landed on the ground, he was no longer breathing. It turned out that he had been shot in the chest. Since he had suddenly appeared and prepared for such a long time, how could Yang Chendong let the news leak out? When he gave the order to attack, all 4 gates of Shangding City were filled with mercenaries. Before the battle even started, Shangding City was already a dead city. The North City Gate was the main attack, while the other 3 city gates were the main defense. Anyone who rushed out, whether they were dignitaries, soldiers, or ordinary people, was greeted with whistling bullets. With a long spear in hand, who in the world could be his match? With strong fighting spirit and confidence, the mercenaries rushed into Shangding City from the North City Gate without encountering any decent resistance. Then there was a burst of intensive gunfire, and the massacre began. All the people of the Golden Rim dynasty who were still running around on the streets, no matter what their identities were suffering the wrath of the mercenaries. Gunshots came one after another. After only half an hour, the pungent smell of blood floated in the air and did not dissipate for a long time. The street was already full of corpses and rivers of blood, but the mercenaries still had no intention of stopping. Unless they stayed in their homes and did not go out, as long as they went out on the street, they would face a merciless massacre. The mercenaries had never done such a thing before, but this time they took advantage of the massacre of the Sorangan family on the Mekong River to launch a bloody revenge. The mercenaries wanted to use facts to tell the world and warn everyone how terrible it was to be their enemy, and how wrong it was to do so. The massacre lasted for 4 hours, and there was no one left on the street. They stopped and took a breath. The next work was done by the 20,000 Laotian mercenaries. They began to push the doors open one by one. They did not kill anyone, but just called out the surviving people and let them see the bloody scene while cleaning the battlefield. Almost all the Sorangs who were rushed out of their homes were pale, and then vomited. This scene would be imprinted in their minds, and they would never forget it. Clean up the battlefield, gather the valuable things, and arrange a team of 1,000 to drive the carriages back to Laos. Then drive all the people out of Shangding City. Rest for the night, and set off for Jiging City tomorrow morning. Yang Chendong gave several orders in succession. He did not kill all the Phnom Penh people, but deliberately let a group of people go. He believed that these people would become the best mouthpieces. He believed that it would not take long for this bloody scene to spread throughout the Phnom Penh dynasty. He wanted to completely intimidate his opponents before the war began. He wanted to make their morale plummet, and at the same time, make them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. In this way, when the 2 armies met, it would be easier for them to win the war. Jiging City. It was one of the big cities at the north gate of the Sorangan dynasty. It was another big gate after Shangding City. At this moment, the city was full of soldiers. Not only in the city, but also outside the city, there were barracks. One after another, there seemed to be no end to it. Hun Sen's 100,000 troops were stationed here. According to the plan, Hun Sen was the vanguard to rush to Shangding City as soon as possible, then go up north along the Mekong River and directly attack Bansa City in Laos. However, the sudden news from Laos made Hun Sen hesitate. He did not forget King Boromir's advice before he came. This was the time to show his strength. It would be best if they did not have to fight the mercenaries. After all, when facing the powerful mercenaries, they had no advantage except for the number of troops. Now that an accident had occurred, Laos acted as if nothing had happened. Under such circumstances, if Hun Sen still took the initiative to attack the enemy's territory, it would not be defending the country, but provoking the enemy. This was tantamount to forcing the mercenaries to fight with them. This was definitely not what the king wanted to see, so Hun Sen stationed his army in Jujing City without asking for permission and biding his time. He only sent someone back to Golden Rim City to ask for the king's orders. Hun Sen originally thought that as the vanguard, he would have to fight the mercenaries to the death, even at the cost of his own life. Unexpectedly, the mercenaries were scared, which made the 100,000 troops happy. During the time they were stationed, all the soldiers drank and ate meat every day. Anyway, the military budget was more than enough this time. Most of it was provided by the nobles, so it would be a waste not to eat and drink. They celebrated as if they had won the battle. Even Hun Sen did not say anything when he heard about it. He had been under a lot of pressure before, and now that the pressure was gone, it was time for the soldiers to relax. Because of this, Hun Sen gained the support of most of the soldiers, which made his popularity soar in a short time. He was almost on par with the first general, Dagon. Hun Sen was still immersed in his vanity, but he did not know that danger was approaching. The 2nd and 3rd regiments of the 1st Division of the Cold Front had arrived outside Jiging City and were ready to launch a fierce attack. After marching for 2 days, they had covered 300 miles under their feet. Then they rested for an afternoon. When it was dark, the regiments, battalions, and companies began to slowly encircle the 100,000 vanguard troops of the Golden Rim dynasty according to their previous orders. The sky was dark, but the camp of the Golden Rim dynasty was as bright as day. Numerous bonfires were set up, and mutton was hanging on each wooden rack. Under the roasting fire, there was a crackling sound, and the aroma spread far and wide. As the vanguard general, Hun Sen sat on a temporary wooden mat, with good wine in front of him and beautiful women beside him. He drank one cup after another and laughed heartily. It was true that one should enjoy life to the fullest, and not let the golden cup be empty to the moon. Beside Hun Sen, there were some captains and kiliarchs. They used wooden mats to form a large circle. In the circle, 2 skilled soldiers were sparring with each other. Occasionally, there would be 1 or 2 weak soldiers in a strong army who were afraid of death. Similarly, in a weak brigade, there were also warriors with good skills. The 2 soldiers who were competing were the best in the Phnom Penh army. They each displayed what they had learned, and the wonderful performance of their fists on flesh attracted a burst of applause from other soldiers. "Ah, good. You're worthy of being the best in our vanguard. Come, reward them." Hun Sen was affected by the fierce fight between the 2 soldiers and shouted loudly. Then the soldiers beside him took the silver and gave it to the 2 warriors who were performing. The 2 warriors who got the silver quickly retreated and were replaced by others. Even if there were benefits, everyone should share them. The exciting fight here attracted even more soldiers to watch and cheer spontaneously. The aroma of the meat and the lively performance in front of the tent not only attracted the attention of most soldiers, but also many soldiers who were in charge of guarding the perimeter sneaked over. They did not think that this was a violation of military discipline, because they had heard that Laos was scared. They seemed to be afraid of the army of the Golden Rim dynasty, and they were deep in the country. How could the enemy appear here? Almost every soldier had the same idea. The army camp was chaotic, and military discipline was useless. This was the army camp of 100,000 soldiers. The night wind was still blowing. A danger that could decide their life and death was slowly approaching. However, not a single one of the 100,000 people was alarmed. They were still drinking, eating, chatting, and talking about things that interested them. Chapter 609. Young Master, these enemies are too weak. Our vanguard is 500 meters away from them, but they still haven't discovered us. Tiger's Mane put down the night vision telescope in his hand, shook his head, and seemed to be singing a lament for the enemy. An army without a sense of crisis will never be strong. Come on, send out the signal for the general attack. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed. The enemy's carelessness determined their next result. This was the so-called, "you reap what you sow." Beta Persei, who had been waiting for a long time, turned around and shouted, "Let's start the general attack." Yang Er, who had a loud voice to begin with, let out a roar that sounded like the angry roar of the heavens. In an instant, his voice traveled several hundred meters. The second guard team was part-time artillery. After hearing the order, they immediately put the prepared shells into the barrel. Then, the 100mm mortar roared. After flashes of blazing fire flashed in the sky, it fell on the unprepared vanguard camp of the Golden Bian dynasty. Boom, boom. There was no need to aim at any coordinates at all. Any cannonball that fell down would produce an earth-shaking sound. After every cannonball fell, there would be heart-wrenching screams and screams. Hong Sen, who was still tasting wine and looking at the beauty in his arms from time to time, suddenly felt the ground trembling, as if an earth dragon was about to turn over. Before he could figure out what was going on, huge flames appeared in his sight. He instantly lost his hearing and his mind stopped working at this moment. The only thing left was the scene of him opening his mouth and not making a sound. Kill! The mercenaries, who had already been in place, began to madly rush in from 4 directions. As they continued to move forward, bullets with fire were shot out from the barrel like a dense rain. With the help of the still-burning bonfire, one could see the Golden Bian dynasty soldiers falling to the ground one after another. This was a massacre, without any suspense. From the very beginning of the war, the situation had been one-sided. Yang Chendong had carefully prepared for the war in Laos for nearly 4 months. With the overwhelming advantage of advanced firearms, the enemy's will to fight had crumbled in less than 15 minutes. The entire camp was filled with soldiers begging to surrender. War was such a miraculous thing. One could win against many with a few, defeat the strong with a weak force, and extinguish the flames of war that should have burned for a long time in an instant. In today's battle, at least 2 of the 3 aspects mentioned above were perfectly reflected. In a situation where their military strength was far inferior to the enemy's, due to their meticulous preparations and unparalleled pressure, the enemy was defeated without even putting up a decent resistance. One by one, they knelt on the ground, no longer as arrogant and insufferably arrogant as before. Originally, they thought that this battle would last until dawn or even longer. After all, there were 100,000 enemies here. Even if there were 100,000 pigs, it would be a laborious task to catch all of them. However, humans were often worse than pigs. At least pigs instinctively knew how to run when they saw danger, but humans would not because they had intelligence and brains and knew how to avoid danger. When they saw that there was no way to escape, they chose to surrender. Perhaps for some people, surrendering was shameful. But for the defeated soldiers, it was a very effective way to save their lives. In just over 4 hours, just after midnight, the 100,000 enemy soldiers were completely under the control of the mercenaries. They were all tied up with long ropes that had been prepared beforehand. Then they were tied together like gourds. Their heads were lowered, and they looked like children who had done something wrong. Reporting to the 6th young master, the enemy camp has been controlled. More than 90,000 of them have been captured, 4,000 of them have been killed, and 5,000 have escaped. 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Po walked in front of Yang Chendong and reported the results of the battle after a salute. Not seeing Wu Sheng report, Yang Chendong thought that he was injured and asked with concern, "Where is Regiment Commander Wu?" Reporting to the 6th young master, Regiment Commander Wu led the 1st Battalion to chase after the enemy. 3rd Regiment Political Commissar and 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo reported after Luo Po. Chase after the enemy? They didn't catch Hun Sen? Yang Chendong's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately thought of a conclusion. Only when the enemy's main commander was escaping could Wu Sheng abandon his troops and choose to chase after him. Yes. This time, it was 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Po who stood up to answer the question. At the beginning of the battle, the situation was too chaotic and some of the enemies escaped. I didn't expect Hun Sen to be among them. 6th young master, we ask for your forgiveness. 3rd Regiment also asks for forgiveness. Since Wu Sheng wasn't around, Political Commissar Chen Bo spoke on his behalf. What are you guilty of? Yang Chendong glared at them. You all have performed very well. It's normal for some of the enemies to escape in the chaos. We have limited manpower and can't defend against them. Besides, didn't Regiment Commander Wu chase after them? Maybe there will be some good news. Just as Yang Chendong finished speaking, a warhorse rushed over from afar. Then he heard Wu Sheng's cursing voice. Damn it, your fighting ability is mediocre, but your escaping ability is top-notch. Fine, there's no need to guess. They must have failed to catch him. Sure enough, when Wu Sheng passed through the first and second line of defense and arrived in front of Yang Chendong, he saluted with a black face. Sixth young master, your humble servant is incompetent. We didn't catch Hun Sen? Did he really escape? Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh. A vanguard general couldn't be underestimated. Otherwise, why didn't they catch 90,000 captives? Yes, he escaped. I chased after him with the 1st Battalion and killed more than 300 enemies. We also captured some captives, including Hun Sen's soldiers. They confirmed that he had escaped. Wu Sheng reported in a depressed tone. Then Wu Sheng straightened his body. Sixth young master, your humble servant requests to continue the chase with the 1st Battalion. No matter what, we have to kill this enemy general who looked down on us. Wu Sheng wasn't just saying. Before the battle, he had made a bet with the 2nd Regiment commander, Luo Pe, to see who could catch Hun Senator. He had never expected that it would end up like this. Well, there's no need to chase him. Besides, he can't run away. It won't be long before we kill our way into Phnom Penh City. At that time, we'll see how he can escape. As for now, immediately arrange for someone to send the captives back to Laos. There will be people there to meet you. 90,000 captives, and they're all strong laborers. I think Yu Qian will be very happy to receive them. Yang Chendong laughed. According to the intelligence, the entire Phnom Penh dynasty only had 400,000 soldiers, including 100,000 new soldiers. In one battle, they had destroyed a quarter of the enemy's forces. No matter how one looked at it, it was a great victory. Presumably, when the news spread out, many people would be blinded. The Battle of Jujing was equivalent to a blow to the Phnom Penh dynasty. It proved that the mercenary regime was sacred and inviolable, but at the same time, it exposed their position. Obviously, it was not realistic to launch a sneak attack next. But even so, Yang Chendong and the mercenaries were still very confident in their abilities. Wasn't the reason why they trained as if their lives depended on it? Wasn't it so that they could perform better on the battlefield? Hun Sen escaped. Relying on the fact that his mount was of a better breed, he ran very fast. He only dismounted when the warhorse started foaming at the mouth. At this time, he could already see the walls of the next city, Chuanlong. The mercenaries suddenly appeared in the country and defeated the 100,000 vanguard led by Hun Sen in Jujing. The captives were more than 90,000. After Hun Sen personally confirmed the news, the Chuanlong city guard sent the news to the capital, Phnom Penh City. Along with the news, there was also the fact that Shangding City was breached and 30,000 civilians were slaughtered. This was all spread by the people who were deliberately released by the mercenaries. There was absolutely no question about its reliability. The two news spread one after another in the territory of the Phnom Penh dynasty, causing waves of panic among the people. The mercenaries were too powerful. In just a few days they had conquered 2 cities, killed more than 100,000 people, and captured more than 100,000 people. Could the country's army defeat such an opponent? In Phnom Penh City, when the news arrived, it was not only the people who were panicking, but also some dignitaries. They knew that the mercenaries were very powerful. After all, this had been proven by the facts. Because of this, they took out their wealth to support the country's army, hoping that they could win the war with a generous reward. But now, reality had given them a big slap in the face. Everyone was silent at the same time. They also had doubts in their hearts. Was it right for them to support their country to go to war with the mercenaries? In the palace, the moment King Boromir received the news of the war, he sat there without moving for a long time as if he had been petrified. When he came back to his senses, he cursed. First, he scolded the mercenaries for not playing by the rules. They were clearly trying to keep the peace and were about to admit defeat. However, they suddenly sent out troops and caught them off guard with a sneak attack. Then he scolded Hun Sen for his stupidity and incompetence. Hun Sen's 100,000 troops were completely defeated in less than 4 hours. How was he a vanguard general? He was clearly an idiot. When he thought about how this was caused by this person, he was even more furious. He could not wait to skin this person and pull out his tendons to relieve the hatred in his heart. He had cursed, but the situation would not change because of his curses. What to do next was ultimately up to him, the king. General Dagon, I will give you 150,000 soldiers to guard Chuanlong City. No matter what, you cannot let the mercenaries take a step forward. I will immediately send people to Siam and the Awad dynasty to ask for help. Since we are allies, they can't just stand by and watch us get beaten. Chapter 610. The alliance had become his last hope, and Boromov hoped that they would be willing to fight to the death and send troops to Laos. As long as they made a move, the mercenaries would be attacked from both sides. The mercenaries were likely to retreat. Then, it would be time for him to recover what he had lost and restore the prestige of the country. He quickly arranged for people to get reinforcements. Then, he fixed his eyes on Chuanlongqing. Not only King Boromir, but many people in the entire Golden Border dynasty had their eyes on Chuanlongqing. They wanted to see the result of the clash between the two armies. Would it be beneficial or disadvantageous? The news of the victory in the Battle of Jigging City had finally spread. At first, it was just some gossip. There was no confirmation, but it had already shocked many nobles. Didn't they say that the mercenaries would not make a move? Didn't they admit defeat? Why did the battle start so soon? Before that, they did not receive any news at all. There was no lack of smart people among the nobles. They quickly remembered that the 20,000 Laotian mercenaries were transferred to the south. At that time, it was said that it was to eliminate bandits and to prevent the Golden Border dynasty's army from pressing on the border. Now, it seemed that it was just an excuse. They were probably already on the battlefield at that time. The nobles had bribed many Laotian mercenaries. After all, these people were born here. They had too many concerns and too many shortcomings. However, it was obvious that these people were also kept in the dark. They did not know their mission until the moment before the battle. At that time, because of the tight lockdown, they could not send back the news. So, what did this mean? Did the mercenaries know that they would interfere and were already on guard? Or was it all because of military needs? If it was the latter, of course, it did not matter. It was understandable that the army needed to lock down the news. However, if it was the former, would the nobles be dissatisfied with their interference in the mercenaries' affairs? Would they even be the next target of punishment? These nobles were originally people who had lost their power. They had inherited too many things from their ancestors. In fact, they were already in dire straits. If the mercenaries stepped on them at this time, how could they resist? While these people were in a state of panic, the news that the mercenaries had conquered Shangding and Jujing, killing tens of thousands of enemies and capturing 90,000 enemies, was reported to the Yang dynasty. For a time, all the Xianxia inns in the various cities were overcrowded. Many commoners squeezed into these inns to drink the free tea and listen to the literate people talk about the news over and over again. Their faces were filled with excitement and excitement. Under the influence of Yang Bao's public opinion, more and more people learned about the policies of Lao Province. As Lao Province's infrastructure was on the right track, more and more people had jobs and money to earn. Through the distribution of land to the rich, more and more people were able to live on land that belonged to them. As long as the people had land in their hands, they would feel at ease and satisfied. Although the Lao provincial government had only been established for a few months, it had already received the sincere support of many of the people. This time, when they learned that the mercenaries who were guarding the fruits of their victory had won a great victory, almost everyone was happy. If they won the war, it meant that the benefits in their hands would not be taken away at will. In front of a bright future, the Lan Tsung kingdom could go to hell. In the past, this kingdom had not treated the people well. If they were allowed to kill their way back, wouldn't they return to the days when they did not have enough food to eat and clothes to keep warm? The people were the most direct in their actions. They did not care about right or wrong, good or bad. They only knew that if someone was good to them, they would be good to that person. Now that the Lao province's policies were on their side, naturally, they would side with the Lao province. In addition, There were the educated youths among them who were spreading the news every day. There were also the Han people who had gained more benefits from the war. Thus, the opinions of the people were surprisingly unified. In the afternoon when the news was published, at least 7,000 young people had signed up to join the army. They were using their actions to support the Lao provincial government. As the provincial governor, Luan Shaochen was very touched by the actions of the people. However, as a sub-province, there were strict regulations on the number of soldiers they could have. This was to prevent other provinces from secretly expanding. Thus, in the face of the enthusiasm of the people, Luan Shaochen personally received them at the square in front of the government building. He expressed his gratitude and stated that there was no shortage of people in the mercenary army. He also asked them to return first. If there was a need to recruit soldiers, Yang Baozhong would report it. As for the youths who did not want to join the army on a whim, he suggested that they sign up first to learn some basic military knowledge. If there was a need for soldiers, those with experience would naturally be given priority. After much persuasion, they finally managed to persuade more than 7,000 people to go back. This scene quickly spread throughout the entire Wanxiang city, causing many people to be shocked. In just a few short months, the Lao provincial government had already won the hearts of the people. It seemed like even the Lansong kingdom's most glorious period could not achieve this. With Luan Shaochen holding the fort and meticulous preparations, the provincial government was operating as usual. Other than continuously sending various war preparations to the front lines, they were fully focused on developing their businesses and infrastructure. Just like Crimson City, they were developing day by day. With the victory at the front lines, the nobles did not dare to make any sarcastic remarks and became much more obedient. The goods that were originally overstocked were also quickly sold out when the news of the victory at the front lines spread. Since the mercenary army had expressed their determination to protect the merchant group, what else did they have to worry about? Even if they could not sell their goods to Phnom Penh, Siam, and Ava. But weren't there other countries and regions around them? Just Great Ming alone was a huge market, and it was enough for them to mess around. The merchants began to move. Every time they brought in goods, they would have to pay more tax. The money from the sale of goods could not be intercepted in Lao province, and all of it had to be handed over to Chien City after the transaction. However, the tax did belong to them, and they could use it to develop their businesses. Money made the world go round. The development of Lao province entered a faster track. However, in this era of rapid development, there was a sudden movement in Langkai City, which was south of Wanxiang City. The Siam kingdom had sent out 200,000 soldiers and was about to attack the city. As the war progressed, the days passed, and Siam and Ava finally started to make their moves. This was especially so for Siam, whose territory was adjacent to Wanxiang City, where the Lao province government was located. When they received King Boromir's request for help, the higher-ups made the decision to send troops to Wanxiang City. King Ili Chi of Siam was a person with foresight. When Jiaoji was still around and sent troops to South Ming, his attention was already on this place. If not for the fact that he had to cross Lansong and Jiaoji to enter Great Ming, he would have already thought of sending troops to seize the resources of Great Ming. What happened next was beyond Ili Chi's expectations. Suddenly, a mercenary army appeared and defeated the seemingly strong Jiaoji. Then, the mercenary army took over Lansong and changed its name to Lao Province. This series of actions immediately made him feel nervous. Ili Chi was worried about the powerful military strength of the mercenary army. He was worried that they would use this opportunity to attack him. In all honesty, if he had such a powerful army, he would definitely not be soft-hearted. He would definitely raise his butcher's knife and slash down on the people and regions that he felt deserved it. He believed that he was not the only one who felt this way. The mercenary army would also feel the same way. Originally, he was thinking of how to fight his way out of this chaotic world, expand his territory, and create a great empire. However, the unexpected rise of the mercenary army forced him to give up on this idea. Instead, he thought of how to protect himself. This was the reason why Siam, Phnom Penh, and Ava formed an alliance. In other words, They felt the danger and huddled together to protect themselves. They were confident that with the alliance of the three countries, they would have considerable strength. Although it was not enough to destroy the mercenary army, it would at least make them feel pressured. What was unexpected was that not long after the alliance was formed, the Sorangan family incident occurred. While Li Qi was scolding General Hun Sen for his stupidity, he was also paying close attention to the development of the situation. Fortunately, some news came not long after. The mercenary army suddenly stopped mentioning this matter, as if they had admitted defeat. However, why was his heart still unable to calm down? The facts proved that Li Qi's intuition was right. On the surface, the mercenary army seemed to have admitted defeat. However, they had been gathering their forces secretly and launched an unexpected and swift attack. Not only did they occupy two big cities, but they also directly destroyed the 100,000 troops of the Phnom Penh dynasty. This weakened the strength of the enemy and showed the invincible and powerful side of the mercenary army. Li Qi admired their actions, but at the same time, the pressure increased greatly. Today, the mercenary army was targeting the Phnom Penh dynasty. Would they target Siam tomorrow? Instead of letting the mercenary army approach step by step, it was better for them to take the initiative to attack, especially when the mercenary army was confronting the Phnom Penh army. If they suddenly attacked, their chances of winning would be much higher. Once they captured Wanxiang City, not only would they be able to obtain the wealth and various resources in the city, but it would also be tantamount to seizing the mercenary army's escape route. This would greatly relieve the pressure on the Phnom Penh dynasty. As for whether this would lead to the retaliation of the mercenary army, what a joke, they were already enemies. Was there a need to be afraid of such things happening? Siam's unannounced attack caused a wave of panic in Wanxiang City. The nobles who had become obedient began to move again. Some of them even began to secretly contact the special envoy sent by Siam. They seemed to have decided to side with the other party. Chapter 611. The higher-ups were in a state of panic. Some chose to contact the emissary to surrender, some were hesitant and wanted to wait and see. There were also those who firmly supported the emissary. For example, people like Long Qi and then Ong Si. As the governor of Laos, Luan Shaochen saw all of this. In addition to constantly sending people to capture Siamese spies, he also made preparations to defend the city. Now, he had a company, 2 auxiliary battalions and 10,000 Laotian mercenaries. If he used them well, it was not impossible to defend the city. Luan Shaochen had no intention of asking Yang Chendong for help. He was the one who agreed to blow up the Solingans matter. Now that he could not control the situation, he had to look for the person behind him. The arrogant Luan Shaochen would not do such a thing. He was actively preparing for the battle. He was also considering if he could send the 7,000 people who had signed up to the city tower. These people had already undergone 7 days of military training. Although they were still new recruits, they were not completely clueless. At least they knew what military orders were and what was forbidden. The situation in Wanxiang City became tense. However, most of the staff and officials of the provincial government were not afraid. They did not trust Governor Luan, but they trusted the 6th young master. Since this battle was commanded by the 6th young master, he would not ignore the possibility of Siam sending troops. Now that the news had spread, it would not be long before the mercenary reinforcements arrived. Everyone seemed to believe that Yang Chendong would transfer the troops from Phnom Penh dynasty. However, after waiting for a long time, there was no news. As time passed, people began to waver. Below Chuan Long City, the main force of the mercenary army that everyone had placed their hopes on was now gathered. Yang Chendong was also standing in front of the temporary command center's sand table with a relaxed expression. He didn't seem worried at all because the attack and defense of Wanxiang City was about to begin. Are all the battalions and companies ready for battle? Yang Chendong retracted his gaze from the sand table and turned around to look at the 2nd Regiment Commander of the Icy Blade Division, 3rd Regiment Commander Wu Sheng, and the Auxiliary Regiment Commander Lu Zhua. Everything is ready. We can attack the city at any time, Luo Pa said excitedly on behalf of the other officers. After he finished speaking, A look of struggle and hesitation appeared on his face, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. What's wrong? If there's anything you want to say, just say it. How are you hesitating like a regiment commander? Noticing the change in Luo Po's expression, Yang Chendong stared straight at Luo Po, as though he could see through his thoughts. Yes. Luo Po straightened his body. Sixth young master, there's news that the Siam Kingdom has sent their troops to attack Wanxiang City. Is that true? That's not something you need to worry about. You just need to fight this battle well. Even though Yang Chendong knew that the officers were concerned about the overall situation, Yang Chendong still rejected them without hesitation. One had to be single-minded when doing things. On the battlefield, a small mistake could lead to serious consequences. Since that was the case, there was no point in thinking about things that were beyond one's control. Luo Po, who was criticized by Yang Chendong, replied with a straight face. He only wanted to remind the sixth young master. He also knew that the most important thing now was to defeat the Golden Bian dynasty's army. Luo Po was criticized, but Yang Chendong knew that this was not his idea alone, but that all of the officers probably had the same idea. It seemed that if he did not say a few words, these people would inevitably be distracted, and it would be difficult for them to concentrate. Well, young master has already made arrangements for Wanxiang City. You don't have to worry. If you're really worried, it's better to think about how to defeat the Golden Bian army quickly. As long as the war here is resolved, we can naturally turn back and give Siam a slap in the face. We'll let them know the consequences of provoking us. Yes, defeat Golden Bian and fight back against Siam. The regimental officers in the command center all said bluntly. Well, since everyone is ready, let's check our watches now. We'll launch the general attack in an hour. Yang Chendong raised his right arm, revealing the exquisite military watch on his wrist. At the same time, several regimental officers also looked at the military watch on their wrists. Chuanlong City. It was not a big city in the Golden Border dynasty, but because of its unique geographical location, beside the Mekong River and behind the Orange Well City, it became a strategic place and one of the front doors to enter the Golden Border city of the Golden Border dynasty. At this time, the 150,000 troops led by General Dan were guarding this place. General Hun Sen, who had retreated to this place, had been kidnapped and sent back to Golden Bian dynasty. 100,000 defeated soldiers, this was a crime that this general would have to bear. Once Hun Sen was punished, Dan's influence and strength in the army would rise to a new level. After all, no one would compete with him, and he would be worthy of being the boss. The army entered the city and took over the defense line of the entire city. Dagon also became the boss of the city. After inspecting the defense of the city tower, he returned to his temporary residence and called for a group of singers to sing a song. He crossed his legs and looked very leisurely. He had figured out the situation of the mercenaries these days. Dan woke up from the shaking and shouted, "Immediately send reinforcements to the north gate according to the plan. No matter what, we must take back the gate." At this moment, Dan realized that he had underestimated the enemy. He originally thought that the mercenaries were powerful because their opponents were too weak. Otherwise, why would they launch a sneak attack against the 100,000-strong army led by Hun Sen? If they really had the strength, why didn't they fight a fair and square battle? On the battlefield, underestimating one's opponent meant paying a heavy price. It could even be the price of one's life. After shouting these words, Dan looked at the guard who was still standing in front of him and could not help but be angry. "Go and pass the order. At the same time, order the inspection team to block the enemy. Anyone who deserts will be killed." The army of the Golden Bian dynasty moved slowly. Under the general's order, tens of thousands of soldiers went straight to the north gate, trying to regain control of it. At the north gate, it was Chang Chunyang of the 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment who attacked. He had just taken up the post of battalion commander not long ago, and this time, he was given the opportunity to lead the charge. Not only did he have the 400 Cold Vanguard warriors from the 3rd Battalion, there were also 2 auxiliary battalions, totaling more than 1,000 people. Under the accurate bombardment of the 100mm mortar, The north gate was broken like a piece of paper. Then, with a fierce charge, they arrived at the north gate. At this moment, the field of vision became wider. Battalion commander, the enemy is going to counterattack, and they have a lot of people. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Guofeng, smiled. During the charge just now, their company was the vanguard of the vanguard. They were the first to reach the north gate, so they killed the most enemies. However, it seemed that this did not satisfy him. He held a machine gun and fired from time to time. Looking at his capable subordinate with a murderous expression, Chang Chunyang smiled and asked, "What's wrong? Did the battle just now scare you? There are thousands of enemies here. You killed so many people, are you still not satisfied?" Chapter 6:12. You want to scare me with a 1,000-man team? Battalion commander, I'm not bragging. Our company is the strongest. Even if we face a 10,000-man team, we won't frown. Guofeng said with some pride, and then half a magazine of bullets shot out. Hundreds of meters away, at least 4 or 5 enemies were knocked down to the ground. You're good. Since that's the case, then I'll allow you to continue charging. There are only 10,000 people on the other side now. I'll leave them all to you. Looking at Guofeng's boastful look, Chun Yangyuan wanted to kick him. But in the blink of an eye, he decided to provoke him and give him a slap in the face. Of course, Guofeng was bragging. 100 against 10,000, even if they had a powerful flintlock in their hands, it was difficult to do. Not to mention that the enemy was still carrying out a planned charge. Occasionally, the enemy's inspection team could be seen behind the army. With such a great achievement, the company dare not enjoy it alone. It's better to let the wise battalion commander lead us. Guofeng knew that he was bragging, but he didn't care. Instead, he said with a flattering look. In any case, they would often joke about such things in private. Chun Yangyuan snorted and didn't expose Guofeng's embarrassment. Instead, he said with a very serious expression, "No matter how many enemies come, we have to kill them all. As long as we attract enough firepower from the enemy, the pressure on the commander's side will be reduced, and the faster it will be." When it came to serious matters, Guofeng also put away his cynical expression. He turned around and shouted to the soldiers around him while firing his gun, "Fire for me, don't be afraid of wasting bullets, and don't let the enemy counterattack." Shoot. Bang bang bang, da-da-da, tut-tut-tut, all sorts of gunshots rang out, representing the sounds made by different firearms. Thousands of tongues of fire spewed out together, suppressing the enemy's charging force in an instant. When the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty fell down as if they were blown by a hurricane, the momentum of the attack began to slow down. Knowing that they would die if they rushed forward, no one would not cherish their lives. If it weren't for the inspection team behind them, they would have turned around and fled long ago. Gunshots were still ringing out from the north gate, and the soldiers of Chuanlong City were rushing towards the north gate to provide reinforcements. It was as if they would not stop until they had taken back the north gate. While everyone's attention was on the north gate, the attack on the east gate began. Unlike the north gate where there was only one cold vanguard battalion, the one leading the charge at the east gate was the 3rd Regiment commander, Wuxia. This time, he had brought 2 main battalions, 4 auxiliary battalions, and 5,000 Laotian mercenaries. His goal was to charge into the city in one go to crush the enemy's morale and destroy their will to fight. The mission Yang Chendong gave them was to be like an arrow piercing through the clouds, tearing the enemy's defensive line in half, paving the way for the main force to enter the city. In order to better complete the 6th Young Master's mission, Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Qin Bo decided to split up after a discussion. First, the 3rd Battalion, Spring Sun, would take down the north gate and attract the enemy's main force. Then, they would rush into the east gate and catch the enemy off guard. It seemed that this was the only way they could successfully enter the city and carry out the mission. Otherwise, if there were too many enemies, and they were all blocked together, it would be impossible to open a path in front of a sea of people. The plan went very smoothly. While the north gate was busy fighting, the attack on the east gate began. Furthermore, under the careful planning of the 2 main battalions, When the 40 rocket launchers directly smashed open the North City Gate, Wuxia led the mercenaries and charged in like an avalanche. Everyone was filled with murderous intent, and everyone rushed forward. The guns in their hands were constantly spewing flames, and they were like gods who had descended from the heavens. Whenever an enemy was in their line of sight, they would be hit by bullets as soon as they raised their swords and rushed forward. They would either die immediately or fall to the ground and cry out in pain. Along the way, they looked down on everyone. No one was their match and no one could stop them. Dagon had already put on his armor and rushed to the north gate under the protection of a group of bodyguards. Before he reached the city, a messenger reported that the east gate had been breached. Quickly send people to block the east gate. Don't let any enemy enter the city. With the previous example of blocking the north gate, Dagon did not panic. In his opinion, even if he had to use human lives, he could still chase the mercenaries out of the city. At this moment, Dagon did not fully value the mercenaries. Or rather, he did not see the true strength of the mercenaries. He really thought that it was an ancient war where he could rely on numbers to turn the tide. He did not know that unless he could stop the mercenaries' charge in one go, the appearance of the mercenaries would only be a tactic of filling the gap. It was not effective at all. The battle at the East Gate was far more intense than the North Gate. One was defense, the other was offense. One was support, and the other was the main force. The situation was completely different. Before they could figure out the mercenaries' true intentions, groups of Golden Border Dynasty troops rushed to the East Gate and were eliminated one by one. When they sent out a 100-man team, they would be wiped out. When they sent out a 1,000-man team, they would be heavily injured. When the 2,000 inspectors arrived, all they saw was a street full of corpses and injured people lying on the ground. What they saw was the main force of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard charging towards them with guns in hand. Attack! Seeing that another group of enemies had appeared, and there were quite a number of them, Political Commissar and 2nd Battalion Commander Chin Bo took the lead. He held the 95 style in his hand and activated the burst mode. As he strode forward, he kept pulling the trigger. As soon as the inspection team saw the situation clearly and was about to turn around and retreat, intense gunshots rang out. The 2,000 people instantly scattered like a beehive that had been poked, leaving behind hundreds of corpses on the ground. In just one encounter, hundreds of corpses were left behind. This kind of strong combat power gave the inspection team a feeling of invincibility. In the past, others had always been in the front. Now that it was finally their turn, they felt the horror and strength of the mercenaries. Waves of enemies appeared at the East Gate one after another and were crippled one after another. Finally, it attracted Don's attention. He began to mobilize more and more soldiers to rush to the East Gate. He was delusional to use the tactic of numbers to drive the mercenaries out of the city. Guns are very powerful, but they will run out of gunpowder eventually. Don't be afraid, just rush forward. As long as you can kill one enemy, you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver. As long as you snatch a gun, you will be rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Afraid that the soldiers below would not use their full strength, Don led his men to the East Gate while constantly raising the bounty. He believed that under the stimulation of profits, there would definitely be people who did not care about their lives. As long as these people could rush to the front of the mercenaries, it would be time for their cold weapons to shine. When there is a great reward, there will always be brave men. This was undoubtedly a wise saying. Some people who chose to join the army were putting their lives on the line. They were already prepared to die. As the saying went, wealth comes from danger. In order to fight for a better future, many soldiers rushed toward Wuxia's 2nd platoon like moths to a flame. Bam bam bam. Tat tat tat. The sound of gunshots continued. One by one, the enemies fell in the path of the charge. However, the momentum did not seem to have any intention of stopping. Many people were still moving forward with the help of their comrades' shadows. I only have one magazine left. When a cold vanguard warrior reached for his waist, he suddenly felt nothing and shouted subconsciously. I only have one magazine left too. I have 2 more. I don't even have one left. A cacophony of voices rushed into Wu Sheng's ears. While his face turned bitter, he could not help but turn around and shout, "Who told you to waste bullets like this?" Wu Sheng could not be blamed for saying this. Before the battle, every soldier had at least 2 basic sets of ammunition. For example, the 95 gun had 600 rounds of ammunition, a total of 20 magazines. At first, they thought it would be enough. Who would have thought that they would run out of ammunition so quickly? All right, everyone, save your bullets. At the same time, equip your bayonets and prepare for close combat. Political Commissar Chenbo also shook his head helplessly. There were too many enemies. From the moment they entered the city until now, they only had about 2,000 people, including the auxiliary soldiers. However, they had to face dozens of waves of enemies in turns. At least 20,000 to 30,000 enemies had been driven away, defeated, or killed by them. With such a glorious victory, it was reasonable that they did not have enough bullets. However, even if they did not have enough bullets, they could still fight in close combat. With their bone-deep training, they could even kill with cold weapons. The enemies would be terrified of them. Equip your bayonets. Commander Wu Sheng also knew that the situation was a bit critical. It was not the time to blame anyone, so he shouted loudly. Then he took out the bayonet from his waist and inserted it into the 95 gun. Suddenly, a flash of white light appeared, like a soldier standing in a standard military posture, majestic. Kill! As he sprinted forward, he fired the last bullet in his magazine. Wu Sheng led the 1st Battalion, 2nd Battalion, 4 support battalions, and 5,000 Laotian mercenaries as they charged forward. Rows of bullets were fired, and the enemies fell to the ground one after another. The morale of the Golden Bian Dynasty soldiers, who wanted to take the opportunity to fight for their lives, dropped, and then they quickly retreated. The people running at the front were better off, but the enemies running at the back were in trouble. They didn't even have the chance to turn around before the mercenaries caught up with them. Then, one by one, the enemies exposed from behind were stabbed by bayonets and fell to the ground, covered in blood. Chapter 613. With a single charge, the 2,000-plus enemy troops were scattered and disintegrated. But before Wu Sheng and the others could catch their breath, another team of 1,000 soldiers came from not far away. The two sides met in a narrow street in the city. Only the brave would win, and a chaotic battle ensued. At this moment, Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers fully utilized the 3-on-3 tactic. The 3 of them worked as one and launched a bayonet charge as if it was their daily training. Every time a dazzling white bayonet was thrust forward, an enemy would be stabbed and fall to the ground. Intestines and blood flowed everywhere. The brave mercenaries also led the 5,000 Laotian mercenaries behind them. They were originally armed with cold weapons, either broadswords or spears. At this moment, they finally came in handy. Following Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, they also brandished their swords to kill the enemies, showing their strong combat power. The team of 7,000 people was like a torrent of steel, constantly killing the enemy and attracting the enemy's main force. After fighting for half an hour, the situation here finally attracted more soldiers of the Golden Bian Dynasty. Especially when they heard that the mercenaries did not have guns, some of them felt that the time had come, so they stopped going to the North Gate and went to the East Gate. The pressure at the East Gate was getting stronger and stronger, while the pressure at the North Gate was getting weaker and weaker. When Chunyang and the others launched another long-range shooting, they found that the number of enemies was rapidly decreasing. When they could no longer form a human wall in front of them, Chunyang of the 3rd Battalion decisively said to the correspondent next to him, "Go and inform the 6th young master, the time has come." Yes, the time had come. The first attack at the North Gate and the slaughter at the East Gate were all for the 3rd step, which was the joint attack of Leng Feng's 2nd Battalion, 14 auxiliary battalions, and the 15,000 Laotian mercenaries. Considering that there were 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian Dynasty in the city, if they all attacked from one gate, it was likely that the gate would be blocked. In the end, they would block the way with only the corpses blocking the way. If that was the case, the enemies would have enough time to escape, which would not achieve the goal of severely injuring the enemy. Therefore, there were two waves of feints. Most of the enemies had gone over to the east gate, leaving the north gate empty. When Yang Chendong received the news, he immediately gave the order to launch an all-out attack. More than 20,000 mercenaries poured in from the north gate, joining up with Spring Sun's Cold Vanguard 3 battalions as they rushed into Dragon River City. The 30,000-strong army was like a whirlwind, and no one could stop them. They used machine guns, submachine guns, and semi-automatic rifles to kill anyone who tried to get close to them. The north gate suddenly became the main attacking force, which made Duane, who was rushing to the east gate, turn pale with fright. This confusion confused him. Where exactly was the enemy's main force, and where should he place his troops to defend? At this time, the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty were in a mess. There were even some soldiers who had been rushing back and forth between the north and east gates. Just as they were about to reach the east gate from the north gate, they received a military order to return to the north gate. These generals were all puzzled and thought about the stupidity of the commanding general. However, they had no choice but to turn around and return to the north gate. It was obviously too late to turn back now. The mercenaries had entered the city, and they were attacking while stabilizing their defense line. As they pushed forward step by step, the entire 5 streets near the north gate were successfully taken over by them. After the first step, they began the second step of the attack. The mercenaries divided into more than a dozen teams in different directions, spreading rapidly to the surroundings like a spreading virus, and no one could stop them. A platoon could often be divided into groups. Once they met the enemy's 100-man team, they would raise their guns and fight. With the advantage of weapons, it was easy for a platoon to fight 100. Once they encountered a 1,000-man enemy, they would retreat while fighting, waiting for their enemies to drop dead bodies in the process. Often, as they fought, another mercenary squad would appear from another street. Then, they would launch a pincer attack from both sides. The enemy would become dizzy, the enemy would be at a loss, the enemy would be crying for their parents, and the enemy would be littered with corpses. More and more mercenary teams began to show their terrible lethality and destructive power, slowly giving the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty in the city a feeling that there were enemies everywhere, that there was danger everywhere, and that there was nowhere safe. In such an environment, the enemy's morale was rapidly disintegrating. After more than 8 hours of resistance, before night fell, the tight string finally broke. The morale of the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty fell to the bottom at that moment, and a large number of defeated soldiers and deserters began to appear. The situation was irreversible. Under the blurred vision, the inspectorate could not see the situation on the battlefield clearly, and more people had the opportunity to escape. As some of the bolder ones took the lead to leave, more and more soldiers began to flee. Black shadows could be seen everywhere in the darkness. Some soldiers even sneaked away 20 meters in front of the inspectorate team. When the stench of blood was combined together, it was inevitable that it would give rise to a very unpleasant smell that made people want to vomit. Fortunately, it was not the first time that the soldiers of the Cold Front and the auxiliary soldiers were on the battlefield. Although the smell was unpleasant, it was not unbearable. Besides, why would people care about the smell when they were tired? In this way, under the unpleasant smell, the soldiers of the mercenary army fell asleep everywhere in the streets and alleys. They were not cut down to the ground, but they were so tired that they simply found an open space to sleep. In the battle during the day, the army of the Golden Bian dynasty showed a strong resistance. Dawn was indeed worthy of the title of the first general. His tenacious fighting spirit made the mercenaries put in a lot of effort. Coupled with the role of the inspectorate, they fully showed the demeanor of a strong second-class army. Previously, Yang Chendong divided the army into 4 classes. The strong Cold Front was the first class. When the number of enemies was too high, a second-class army was enough to threaten a first-class army. This battle was a bit difficult, so it was reasonable that the soldiers were tired. Walking on the street, Yang Chendong's eyes were filled with adorable and tired soldiers. Once he noticed that a soldier's hands and feet were exposed outside of the blanket, Yang Chendong would step forward and help cover them up again. If the soldiers knew about this scene, they would be extremely excited. After all, it was their sixth young master who personally helped them to tuck in the corners of their blankets. Yang Chendong wasn't the only one who helped. Yang Chendong, who was beside him, and the members of the first guard team who followed him also helped. There were too many soldiers and they were too tired. Except for the cold front who was equipped with a sleeping bag and did not need to worry about catching a cold, the auxiliary soldiers and the Laotian mercenaries did not have such conditions. While covering the soldiers with the quilt, Yang Chendong said to Beta Persei beside him, "Tomorrow, arrange for people to go to Resin City and have them produce more sleeping bags. Our soldiers can't fall sick because of lack of rest. This is a great injustice to them." "Young master, I will remember." Beta Persei nodded heavily. This was the young master's concern for the soldiers. Such an order must be passed down as soon as possible. Chapter 614. There is a price to pay for hard work. At the same night, one side's commander was sleeping soundly with countless deserters under his command. The other side's commander was running on the path of caring for the soldiers. The soldiers had a good rest, and when the new day came, they would be more powerful. From this point of view, the outcome was clear. The sky finally brightened. Beta Persei, who was beside Yang Chendong, had been replaced by Tiger's Mane. He was busy making a bowl of hot porridge and sending it over. "Sixth young master, the porridge just came out of the pot. Try it." Yang Chendong took the porridge, took a sip, and sighed. "It tastes good, and it has a lot of calories." "Very good." Although the porridge was not made by himself, Tiger's Mane grinned when he saw that Yang Chendong was satisfied. "By the way, have the other soldiers drunk?" Yang Chendong just sighed and then focused on the soldiers. "They are all queuing up to drink. By the way, young master, the scouts have sent information that at least half of the enemies escaped last night. Today's battle should be much easier." When it came to business, Tiger's Mane also restrained his smile and changed into a serious look. "Well, this time the enemy is more stubborn, and their strength is still barely enough. Fighting with such an enemy will be of great help to improve the combat power and will of the soldiers. But at the same time, this is also the main force of the Gilded Dynasty. According to the intelligence of the Security Bureau, defeating them is equivalent to breaking their backbone. It will be much easier to conquer them next." At this point, Yang Chendong raised his head and poured the entire bowl of porridge into his mouth. At this time, he had a heroic aura on his face. "Pass down the order. We'll launch the attack in half an hour." Deep in Chuanlong City, compared to Yang Chendong's heroism and hot-bloodedness, Dagon's face was filled with rage. Who would have thought that after he woke up from his sleep, he would realize that more than 50,000 of his soldiers had run away in just one night. Including those who had died on the battlefield yesterday, he now had less than 50,000 soldiers that he could use. "What's going on? Didn't I tell you not to open the South City Gate? Where did those people escape from? Don't tell me all 50,000 of them jumped down from the tower?" Dagon asked in disbelief. If it was only a few hundred soldiers using ropes and other objects to escape from the city gate tower, he could still understand. However, how could he accept the fact that 50,000 people escaped in one night? The bodyguard who was asked had a bitter look on his face. Knowing that the general was angry, not only could he not leave, but he could only stay here and explain. Thus, he carefully answered, "General, it was the captain guarding the southern gate who opened the gate and escaped, so, bastard." After hearing the explanation, Dagon raised his leg and kicked him. The bodyguard who was half kneeling was unlucky. He fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Ignoring the soldier's pain, Dagon pulled out the saber on his waist and roared, "So what if 50,000 people escaped? I still have 50,000 men, which is more than the mercenaries. Today I will fight them to the death." Dagon's words were filled with pride, but the dozen or so bodyguards beside him all fell to their knees and pleaded, "General, you can't do that. Now that the morale of the army is low, and the soldiers are exhausted. We can't fight anymore. Where there's life, there's hope. General, please take a step back and regroup. If we fight again another day, we will definitely win. There's an imbalance of power between us and the enemy. You can't use force, General. General, please reconsider. The bodyguards made all kinds of sounds. Their purpose was the same, which was to persuade Dagon to retreat. The army had lost its morale. If they fought now, they would only suffer heavy losses. Yesterday they had 150,000 men, but they did not gain the slightest advantage. They lost tens of thousands and injured tens of thousands. They did not think that they could defeat the mercenaries with only 50,000 men. The bodyguards were not afraid of death, but they thought that it was not worth it to die in such a bloody battle. It would be better to take a step back and fight again after the army was reorganized. That way, the chances of winning would be much higher. You guys? At first, Dagon was unafraid of death, but the bodyguards seemed to be in the same tone. They kept persuading him, which made Dagon's momentum stagnate. Then, his head drooped down like a lifeless puppet. How could Dagon not know that it would be foolish of him to fight the mercenaries under such circumstances? But he was not willing to give up. The 150,000 men under him were the most elite force of the Golden Bian dynasty. With more than 3 times the number of men, the defense of the city wall, and their familiarity with the terrain, they could not defeat the mercenaries. He really did not know how to win. He had a feeling that once he gave up here, it would be difficult to defeat the mercenaries again. But if he continued to fight, how could he win with insufficient troops and low morale? If he retreated, it would be difficult to win. If he fought, he might be wiped out. This was a dilemma to begin with. But he still had to make a choice. Dagon sighed and the sword in his hand fell to the ground. Forget it, forget it. If that's the case, let's retreat. Inform the soldiers in the city to withdraw as much as possible. Then prepare to set fire. Even if we leave, we can't let the enemy have a good time. Dagon finally made the decision to retreat, which made the bodyguards happy. This proved that they did not have to die, so they nodded and agreed. But before they could pass the order, the familiar gunshots suddenly sounded, and then became more and more frequent. It seemed that they were not far away. Not good, the mercenaries are attacking. General, let's go, or I'm afraid it's too late. The bodyguards heard the gunshots that were getting closer and closer. Their faces changed drastically, and they rushed to Dagon's side. If he did not retreat, they would carry him and retreat. Retreat. Dagon wanted to say something tough, but he did not know why. When he heard the gunshots, he was a little scared. Perhaps it was the psychological trauma left by yesterday's battle. But since the enemy had attacked, and he was not fully prepared, it would be meaningless to continue fighting. It was better to retreat now and save some strength anyway. Dagon escaped, and before he left, he gave the order for the entire army to retreat. However, because the mercenaries had launched their attack too early, and because they had replenished their ammunition, many of the enemies were caught before they could escape. In the end, only 20,000 of the 50,000 managed to escape. After General Dagon fled, the mercenaries did not pursue, but began to clean up the enemy forces in the city. The battle lasted from morning to night, and the situation was basically stabilized. Compared to yesterday, Lung Feng did not have any casualties today, and only 3 soldiers were slightly injured. 13 auxiliary soldiers were killed, and 100 were injured. More than 100 Laotian mercenaries were killed, and more than 1,000 were injured. In exchange, they captured more than 40,000 enemies and killed more than 10,000 enemies. In addition to yesterday's battle, they killed more than 30,000 enemies and captured 50,000 enemies in the Battle of Chuanlong City. More than half of the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Border Dynasty were killed, and 80,000 of them were killed. Hurry up and search for anything edible and useful in the city. The troops will rest as they move. We will rest for one more night. Tomorrow morning, we will move towards Su Weng City. After Yang Chendong received the final battle statistics, he immediately issued a new order. In the morning of the second day, the main force of the mercenaries went straight out of Longchuan City, and in just 2 days, they arrived outside Su Weng City. Suing City was one of the biggest cities in the Golden Border Dynasty, and it was an important crossroad to the capital of the Golden Border Dynasty. From here, one could enter Golden Rim City from Pingzhan City in the north. One could also enter Bolomian City in the east. It could be said that once this place was taken, the initiative would change hands, and Golden Border City would face the possibility of being besieged at any time. The news spread like the wind to the south, and when it reached Golden Border City, King Boromir was so shocked that he almost fell off his dragon throne. The civil and military officials didn't have a good reaction either. Some of them were pale because of fear, some of them were red because of anger, and some of them clenched their fists because they wanted to go to the front lines and fight to the death with the mercenaries. Their reactions were different, but the same thing was that they all felt the existence of danger and the feeling of a knife on their necks. Trash. What the hell is Dagon doing? 150,000 people can't even stop 40,000 from the enemy? Didn't he claim to be the #1 general of our country? Is this how he behaves? After digesting the defeat at the front line, Boromir roared. He was just venting out the dissatisfaction in his heart. Then, he began to read out the royal orders regarding the current situation. First, send the army forward to meet up with General Dagon, who was setting up defenses in Suing City. Although the general did not perform well in the Battle of Longchuan City, now was not the time to punish him, and he had to be used to stop the mercenaries. Second, urge the two allies, Siam and Ava, to send out their troops quickly. If they did not send out their troops, the Golden Border Dynasty would be gone, and the alliance would cease to exist. At this moment, the Siam army and flag could be seen outside the south gate of Wanxiang City, the capital of Laos province. Siam had sent 100,000 soldiers to Wanxiang City earlier than King Boromir had expected. Behind them, there were another 100,000 soldiers in Wulong City, the largest city in the north of Siam. They could provide reinforcements at any time. The general leading the army was named Godin. He was the representative of the younger generation of the Siamese military. He was only 35 years old, but he was already the commander of an army of 200,000. From this point alone, it could be seen that he was favored by the king. Standing below the city gate tower, Luan Shaochen, who was only 18 years old, had a bright light flashing in his eyes. His body was full of fighting spirit. When he was in Crimson Castle, he had the experience of training auxiliary soldiers. During the Battle of Ryukyu Island, he had also participated in the battle as a political instructor. He was no longer a war newbie. At this moment, he was not afraid. Instead, he was filled with fighting spirit and vigor. After receiving the order, Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers on the city wall immediately looked for the best shooting position and aimed at the slowly approaching catapults. Catapults were a siege weapon that had been around for a long time. They had always been used to break through a strong city. They could throw out huge rocks in an instant. When the rocks hit the ground, they could cause great damage. It was extremely useful for suppressing the enemy's attack or destroying the enemy's defense. Of course, such a war weapon had its fatal weakness. For example, if the attack distance was too short, its strength would decrease after a mile and it would not be able to use its advantage. Another example would be the lack of accuracy when attacking the target. Often, when a rock was thrown out, it would not be able to predict where it would fly. Most of the time, it depended on luck. Even so, catapults were still widely used. It was because the technology was too simple. Usually, the armies of small countries would use it. It was not like artillery, which required a large amount of manpower, resources, and energy. Even if Chichen City was powerful, the current arsenal was still unable to produce artillery. The best they could do was make some grenades and landmines. All the artillery they used now came from a large warehouse. Fortunately, after obtaining the advanced books from Yang Chendong, the munition factory in Crimson City had no problems producing shells of various calibers. Their research on cannons had also made some progress. Given enough time, it was only a matter of time before the cannons were born. The Siamese army did not have any cannons. The mercenaries stationed in Wanxiang City also did not have any cannons. Yang Chendong would not be at ease leaving such powerful weapons anywhere unless he had a strong military force. Otherwise, if this matter was leaked out, it would not be helping Laos but harming it. There would be people who would think of ways to deal with it. The chances of them being targeted would only be higher. There were no cannons, but there were still 10 Type 40 rocket launchers, hundreds of artillery shells, grenades, and landmines. Luan Shaochen had already buried the landmine 300 meters away from Wanxiang City's southern gate. He had led the entire Langfeng company to set them up at night. Even many officials in the provincial government did not know about this matter. At a distance of 300 meters, the sound of an explosion would not affect the soldiers guarding the city and could even kill the enemy. It couldn't be any better. However, this was just a method. The real battle depended on the performance of both sides. How to prevent the enemy's catapults from getting close to the city and not letting them do their job was the most important thing in a city defense battle. One li was 500 meters. At such a distance, if it was a cold weapon battle, it would be impossible to do anything. As the defending side, no matter what kind of bow and arrow they used, they would not be able to hit the catapults from such a distance. They could only shrink back and let the enemy attack. Since the enemy could not hit accurately, it was all about luck. The same thing happened to the mercenaries, but it was different. They had the Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, which could easily hit the catapults up to 600 meters away. Naturally, they had the ability to control the catapults. What they needed to do now was to prevent the enemy from getting close. Luan Shaochen gave the order. The Langfeng company and the auxiliary soldiers, who were in charge of the first batch of attacks, looked for the best positions. They focused their attention and waited for the enemy's catapults to get closer. In their line of sight, the catapults with large wooden wheels were slowly approaching. As long as they got close enough, they would be able to hit the catapults with boulders. Regardless of the effect, at least the momentum would be there. Then, when the soldiers charged with all their might, if they were lucky, they would be able to set up scaling ladders. Perhaps they would be able to take down the city tower in one go. If they were unlucky, it would be a battle of distance. In the end, the weaker side would be the winner. 700 meters, 650 meters, a soldier from the Langfeng company made a judgment with his sharp eyesight. His voice was heard by his comrades. Even if the catapults were 700 meters away, they would still be able to hit them with their rifles. However, they did not do so in order to pursue accuracy. They did not want to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, 620 meters. 600 meters, fire. When the Siamese soldiers finally reached the optimal firing range, gunshots rang out. Because it was daytime, they couldn't see the gunfire clearly, but the sound of gunfire did not stop. Then, the Siamese soldiers around the catapults fell to the ground one by one as if they had been bewitched. Is this the power of the new repeating rifles? Not bad. Riding on his horse, General Gordon squinted his eyes with an arrogant expression. Then, his surprise turned into excitement. Before they came, the military had obtained some information about the mercenaries. Naturally, they could not hide something like the rifles from them. After meeting Fan Yuhai, he had a better understanding of the situation. Chapter 616. However, it did not matter. This time, Siam had mobilized 150,000 soldiers, which was far more than the Lansong kingdom had mobilized previously. As for the 5,000 cavalrymen that he brought with him, they were there as bystanders. If everything went well, he would not mind getting a share of the loot. If not, he would run as fast as he could. In short, he would not let the mercenaries catch him. Not bad. Men, order the Iron Shield soldiers to lead the charge. Although Gordon was unhappy that Fan Yuhai had disrupted his fantasy, this was a war. Every soldier that died was another loss. Hence, he decided to listen to Fan Yuhai and send out the Iron Shield soldiers. Iron shields that were more than 8 centimeters thick could block bullets from muskets. Iron shields that were more than 10 centimeters thick could also block bullets from muskets in close combat. This had been proven countless times. Before the war, Siam had mobilized a lot of resources and gathered a lot of blacksmiths in the country to forge 5,000 iron shields. The shields were held by 5,000 strong men to defend against the enemy's muskets. Under Gordon's command, the 5,000 iron shield soldiers appeared. Once the 1.5-meter-tall iron shield was set up, it could cover their entire body and protect them from the threat of firearms. It's the Iron Shield soldiers. On the city wall, the Lung Feng soldiers cried out in shock. However, that was all they could do. They were not worried. They did not forget that Governor Xiao Luan had led them to bury many mines. Those were the best weapons against the Iron Shield soldiers. The Iron Shield soldiers can only protect a portion of the people. Look for opportunities to attack those who are not protected. Luan Xiaoqian's expression did not change as he spoke calmly. What happened this time was a test for him. If he could fend off Siam's attack, he would not only be an outstanding local governor, but also a capable general. His knowledge of both civil and military affairs would allow him to walk a better and broader path in the future. The general did not panic and the soldiers were confident. Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers began to look for opportunities to fire continuously. Although this could not stop the enemy from approaching, it was still able to eliminate the enemy's strength to a certain extent. At the same time, it was also a considerable deterrent. Once the shield was out, the gunshots continued. Compared to before, it was much more sporadic. Gordon, who was on his horse, laughed. He could bear such a loss. As long as the main force of the army could approach the city walls, with the help of the trebuchets, their morale would definitely soar. Perhaps if they were lucky, they would be able to seize control of the city walls after a few attempts and obtain the final victory. After the Siamese soldiers threw down hundreds of corpses, the catapults were finally positioned at a distance of 500 meters. Then, boulders were lifted out of the catapults. With the help of levers, the boulders flew into the air and smashed towards Wanxiang City. From afar, the momentum was astonishing, but the weakness was also very obvious. Out of 10 boulders thrown out, it was already very good if one of them hit the city tower. Most of them hit the city wall, causing the ground to shake, but it did not affect the overall situation. But it had to be said that the trebuchet's momentum was still very impressive. Under its encouragement, more and more Siamese soldiers followed behind the shield-wielding soldiers and began to move forward step by step. Sher could even see the appearance of scaling ladders through the cracks. This was a great tool for climbing the city walls. Hit them hard. Above the southern city wall, Luan Xiaoqian could clearly see the enemies slowly approaching because of the high ground. The shield could only protect the front of the soldiers and not the top of their heads. Therefore, the enemy's head was clearly displayed in front of the defenders. They did not even need to aim. All they needed to do was fire a shot at the top of the enemy's head, and one of them would die. This made Cold Vanguard's auxiliary soldiers feel very good. However, they were more excited to see what would happen when the enemy entered the 300-meter-long defensive line. 50 meters left, 30 meters left, 10 meters. Lung Feng was still using his vision to estimate the enemy's position. Boom, 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 boom. Finally, when the first row of shield-bearers crossed the 300-meter battle line, the mines were triggered, and a loud explosion rang out. The powerful force blasted the shield-bearers away, and the huge force sent countless people into the air. The aftermath of the explosion was like a huge wave on the sea, overturning the mountains and overturning the seas, throwing one enemy after another to the ground. At this moment, the Siamese army suffered heavy losses. Not only were more than half of the 5,000 shield-wielding soldiers killed, but most of their shields were also blown into pieces. The Siamese soldiers behind the shield-wielding soldiers were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties. Hit them. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. We still have a lot of ammunition in the palace. Hit them hard. Luan Xiaoqian also took a 95-style pistol and opened up a burst of fire towards the city walls. Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, who were originally in charge of the replacements, were also mobilized. The 900 soldiers were firing at full capacity. At this moment, They were fighting to their heart's content and killing to their heart's content. Under the dual threat of landmines and muskets, the Siamese soldiers, who had lost thousands of soldiers, lost their morale and began to retreat. They trampled over each other as they retreated. Many soldiers died at the feet of their comrades. In such an environment, those who were pushed to the ground would never get up again. How did this happen? How did this happen? What the hell was that thing that exploded? What was that? Seeing his soldiers falling to the ground in droves and turning into corpses, seeing the metal shields being thrown all over the place, some of them even deformed, and seeing the majestic army retreating like frightened rabbits, Gordon was enraged. He turned and stared at Fan Yuhai. His eyes were red and burning with rage. Fan Yuhai was also shocked by the scene before him. He had not seen the mercenaries use such weapons in the previous battles, so he was not prepared. He had forgotten that most of the previous battles were sieges. The use of landmines was naturally limited. In the only battle of Hanoi City, he did not want to destroy the commercial street. Moreover, the Jiaoji army was charging ferociously and did not have time to plant landmines. Hence, he did not use them. However, it did not mean that they could not be used. Now, they finally came in handy. They caught the Siamese army off guard and dealt a heavy blow. The effect was shocking. These are landmines. Actually, the Ming dynasty has used them before, but they were not this powerful. Fan Yuhai was indeed a famous general in Jiaoji. He quickly thought of the deceased generals Ruan Gingwang and Chen Heijin. Both of them had encountered such things in the rainforest. They even said that the mercenaries called them landmines. They were powerful weapons that would explode upon contact. Didn't this match what was happening before him? Landmines? Since you knew, why didn't you say so earlier? Gordon continued to blame him. Obviously, he did not want to bear the consequences of losing the first battle. He wanted to push all the blame to someone else. Fan Yuhai did not answer. Instead, he looked to the front and said calmly, "General Gordon, let's retreat first. There is no one controlling the catapults. The morale is low. Let's regroup and prepare for battle." Following Fan Yuhai's gaze, Gordon noticed that his trebuchets had stopped working and the soldiers in front of the trebuchets were all lying on the ground. It was obvious that this was the result of the continuous firing of the flintlocks. They had lost the first battle just like that. Although Gordon didn't want to admit it, he knew that this wasn't the time for loyalty. He could only grit his teeth and say helplessly, "Beat the gong to retreat. Retreat 5 miles." The Siamese army retreated. They did not even want the bodies of the soldiers, catapults, and shields. The resources were all within the firing range of the mercenaries' muskets. Who could snatch them back? Unless they launched an all-out attack. However, if the problem of landmines was not solved, could they really do it? Victory! The enemy ran away with their tails between their legs. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, when the Siamese army retreated, cheers erupted like a tsunami. It was like a farewell song, mocking the incompetence of the Siamese army. "Don't move. Soldiers, go down and clean up the battlefield. Bring back those that can be brought back and burn those that can't." Luan Xiaoqin's face was flushed with excitement. However, as the commander, he suppressed his excitement and spoke calmly. They could only send the soldiers down because the landmines were not completely destroyed. If they sent someone else, the landmines might explode and cause unpredictable consequences. After that, the soldiers of Cold Vanguard carried barrels of kerosene out of the city. There were too many enemy corpses, and the best way to collect them was to burn them all. Otherwise, with so many corpses, it was inevitable that germs would appear and cause a plague. The Siamese army, which had already retreated, could only watch helplessly as the mercenaries carried out their operations below the city walls. They had tried to wreak havoc earlier, but they were quickly met with a barrage of gunfire from the top of the city walls. They had no choice but to retreat after throwing down hundreds of fresh corpses. This made General Gordon even angrier. He stomped his feet and cursed in the barracks at the back. However, there was nothing he could do. "General Gordon, please don't be angry. The most important thing now is to find a way to destroy their landmines. Otherwise, we will be in a passive position. Fan Yuhai was not a subordinate of Gordon, and he had his own 5,000 cavalrymen. Although he did not have a large number of soldiers, he was powerful. When he faced Gordon, he naturally said whatever he wanted to say. He felt detached from the situation. Solve? It would have been better if he did not mention it. When he mentioned it, Gordon was furious. Before the battle started, Fan Yuhai said that conquering Wanxiang City would be a piece of cake. Why didn't he say that there were landmines? He caused Gordon to lose thousands of men and horses in the first battle. He even lost 2/3 of his iron shields that could block muskets. Now, he had less than 2,000 iron shields. His preparations were destroyed in an instant. He was in a passive position now. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.